The United States continues to praise so-called moderate rebels in Syria for their fight against the Islamic State. But, as One America's Pearson explains, many of these rebels support jihadist beliefs and are committing daily atrocities against the Syrian people. We want to warn you, some of the following footage you're about to see is graphic.
Moderate rebels in Syria. Western governments praise their efforts, and the United States has poured funding into them, supplying the rebels with armored vehicles, weapons, and air support. But controversy surrounds these groups, and a steady stream of reports reveals the rebels are engaged in shocking violence towards civilians and even children.
The moderate rebels that we're supporting in Syria are literally the Manchester bomber. They are the Fort Hood shooter. They are the ISIS attackers in Paris. All of these groups that we have supported in Syria have committed atrocities against civilians.
Experts, such as Janice Kortkamp, a journalist and Syrian activist who's experienced the heart of the conflict in Syria, agree the moderate rebels are little more than U.S.-sanctioned terrorists.
Noor al-Zanki in East Aleppo was highly touted as a moderate rebel group by many think tanks, media, and government officials. Unfortunately, after they had received advanced U.S. weaponry, including TOW anti-tank missiles, they released a video of themselves literally taking a young boy out of a hospital. He still had his IV in his arm. They took him in the back of a pickup truck and showed themselves sawing his head off while they were laughing and bragging that they were worse than ISIS. So this is just one example of what we call moderate rebels in Syria.
Even U.S. troops ordered to train the rebels say the groups have their own agendas and are simply too extreme to cooperate with. Former Green Beret Jack Murphy was among the U.S. forces assigned to vet and train moderate rebels that were handpicked by Washington. However, Murphy said that none of the soldiers supported the mission, warning that by working with the rebels, they were actually training the next generation of al-Qaeda. Murphy says the Free Syrian Army, a group funded by numerous Western governments, including the UK and United States, is, quote, literally indistinguishable from al-Qaeda in Syria.
There is supposed to be a vetting process, but when these guys sit down and do the interviews with the rebels when they come in, and these are guys who mostly have already fled the battlefield, what they're finding is that these guys give cookie-cutter answers. They've been coached on what to say already. So they know that when they come in to talk to U.S. Special Forces, that they have to appear secular. They have to give the appearance that they're secular. So they'll come in and they'll say, oh no, I'm not about jihad, I'm not a Salafi, I'm not a Wahhabi, I'm none of that. But when it comes down to it, the guys can understand that they're not exactly telling the truth. You know, these guys don't even really want to fight ISIS. They don't have any grievances with ISIS. So they want to go out, their real grievances with the Syrian government and the Kurds.
But that hasn't stopped the U.S. from throwing its weight behind groups like the FSA or even the Syrian Democratic Forces. Critics say the SDF are comparable to terrorist groups like al-Nusra Front. They explain SDF forces are unlawful military formations no better than ISIS and are regarded as terrorists by Russian and Syrian officials. Syrian expert Huzma Shaib explained the SDF coordinate not with liberation forces, but only with the U.S. and the Islamic State. It's a group mostly made up of Kurdish YPG militia who have vowed to annex Raqqa if they liberated from ISIS.
The SDF, they're just another group of thugs that we've put together and paid, and they have one goal, which is to carve up the Syrian land and claim it as their own. It's an absurd situation that the United States that is operating in Syria 100% illegally without any invitation from the Syrians or an active war declared by the government of the U.S. We're there, we've established military bases, we've made airstrikes against their military, and now we're saying we're supporting this group and we're just going to carve up Syria and hand it over to this group when we take this particular piece of land.
The official Syrian Arab army is battling desperately to keep the country intact. However, it seems the U.S. is more concerned with protecting its rebel forces, which the civilians call terrorists, than helping the legitimate Syrian government maintain control. On Sunday, a U.S. fighter plane shot down a Syrian Su-22 bomber after it carried out an attack on Syrian Democratic forces. The U.S. claimed the bomber was destroyed as part of a, quote, collective self-defense of coalition-partnered forces. Syria has an extremely limited number of warplanes. Just 42 of its aging Su-22 bombers remain, placing an immense strain on its ability to combat forces like ISIS. Battling internal terrorists, a civil war, and now the U.S. as well, Syria is facing a desperate situation.
The warplane comes and strikes a 5-story building. ISIS would be in the 2nd floor, while the civilians will be in the 3rd and 4th floor. How can the plane attack them? More civilians are killed than ISIS.
But with many major Western governments continuing to oppose President Assad, prospects for peace are becoming less likely. Many agree that if the legitimate Syrian government is toppled, an anti-Western jihadist government will seize control, leaving the Syrian people in chaos, and the United States with yet another enemy to face in the Middle East. Pearson Sharp, One American News.